earlier, I've always had a passion for fantasy movies. I'm very grateful I grew up in the time of the VCR, so that we could rent these movies at the public library or take them, and I'd watch them over and over and over. Star Wars, The Labyrinth, The Dark Crystal, The Never-Ending Story. And then as I became an adult, there seemed to be a gap somehow in my like late teens and the 20s, and then the Harry Potter series came around, and I felt like I was 10 years old again. The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit. See, I get like teary, I think. And now, once again, thanks to J.J. Abrams' Star Wars, I watched the movie this Christmas in 3D in the theater, and yeah, I was just blown away. I was 10 again. And so why do these fantasy movies resonate with us so much? They're filled with magic and fantastical characters and unexpected places, things we've never in our own lives seen or experienced. But whether they're humans or gelflings or hobbits, dwarves, elves, witches, or wizards, they reflect back to us all the essential elements of our own real-world struggles. In their stories, we recognize the hero's journey. And I began my own hero's journey in 2001 when I left the Midwest, the place where I was born, and I headed out to California, determined to become a successful adult. But after years of chasing different careers and making my life finally resemble the one that I thought I was supposed to want, I felt empty. Instead of acknowledging that inner discontent, I continued to focus on the external world around me, and I tried to control everything that I could. I lived in a perpetual state of worry about everything. In 2008, my lack of self-reflection finally caught up with me. I had my first panic attack, followed by constant anxiety for the next 3 years. Eventually, I became depressed. Then I started having thoughts of suicide. Finally, I realized I could no longer ignore my inner suffering. I started seeing a therapist. I began reading the books of Pema Chodron, Byron Katie, and Eckhart Tolle, as well as the philosophies of Buddhism. At some point, I stumbled across a movie called The Namesake, which is based on the book by Jhumpa Lahiri, which is a wonderful book, by the way. It was also about individuals who were lost in their own pain and trying to find their way through their suffering. And during the movie, one of the characters referenced a famous quote by Joseph Campbell, "Follow your bliss." I had never heard of Joseph Campbell. I'd heard that quote. I think it kind of lives sort of woven into the fabric of our culture in one way or another since he said it in the 70s. But I didn't know who he was, and so I decided I didn't know where to find my bliss, let alone follow it. So maybe I should look him up. So I Googled him, and I discovered a transcript of a conversation between him and Bill Moyers from the PBS series The Power of Myth back in 1988, which was released 1 year after Joseph Campbell passed away. And in that conversation, Bill Moyers was trying to understand Campbell's explanations of the concept of myths. And he asked, so myths are stories of the search by men and women through the ages for meaning, for significance, to make life signify, to touch the eternal, to understand the mysterious, to find out who we are? And Campbell said, people say that what we're all seeking is a meaning for life. I don't think that's what we're really seeking. I think what we're seeking is an experience of being alive, so that the life experiences that we have on the purely physical plane will have resonances within that are those of our own innermost being and reality, and so that we actually feel the rapture of being alive. That's what it's all finally about, and that's what these clues help us to find within ourselves. So myths are clues. Myths are the clues to the spiritual potentialities of the human life. His words and his perspectives planted the first seeds of awareness in my life. As I read more about the hero's journey, I finally understood what those fantasy movies meant to me for all those years. They provided a map to the geography of my own struggles throughout my life, even when I wasn't consciously aware of them. I began to accept that panic attacks and anxiety were my call to adventure. Joseph Campbell, the Buddha, and Byron Katie were my mentors, and indeed I would be lost to this day without them. I wrestled with my mind for over a year before I discovered that I also had a helper on my journey. He was my friend Jesse, who I had already known for many years, and Jesse and I had this way of crisscrossing in and out of each other's lives just at the moment that we needed each other most. And there was a very epic feel to our friendship and our conversations, and they usually involved day-long strolls all through San Francisco and all over the Bay Area. In 2001, when my anxiety flared again and the depression started up once again, he guided me out, finally, of that abyss by encouraging me to start writing. I emerged and I stepped onto the path of transformation for the first time. For 2 years, I continued to reflect on and apply the lessons I needed to learn. And one night I received a phone call from a distraught friend. He was a social worker and a mandatory reporter, and earlier that day he had had to turn in an extended family member for child abuse. He was racked with guilt and anger, and in the abyss of his own hero's journey, and so I did what I could. I listened without judgment, assumptions, or expectations. After he apologized for ruining my evening, I said offhandedly, "Are you kidding? I live for this." Suddenly I understood Joseph Campbell's words. I had had an experience that resonated with my innermost self and that allowed me to feel the rapture of being alive. I had found my bliss. I eventually became a life coach so that I could help people experience those same feelings for themselves and learn to access their own wisdom. And I'm writing a book about my personal experiences so that someone else may pick it up and read it on their journey and find clues to the spiritual potentialities of their own human life. In essence, I have embraced a new role as a mentor. And so here I am. I've arrived back where I started almost 15 years ago, crossing the return threshold, a master of two worlds, with the freedom to now live within both. This is the actual experience of enlightenment, not living apart from reality in a rarefied world, but deeply immersed in this one. I realized I became enlightened the moment I woke up to the understanding that reality does not have to change in order for me to find peace in the present moment. Carl Jung once said, "What we resist persists." Don't resist your own call to adventure in whatever form it may come. You're not alone. You will have many mentors and helpers along the way, and at the foundation of it all, the story of the hero's journey, the monomyth that connects all of humanity, will be there to guide you home. And as Joseph Campbell said in that wonderful way that he had to explain something very complex, very simply, we must be willing to let go of the life we have planned so as to have the life that is waiting for us.